Good morning, everybody. This is Mike from the Last Corvette, and I'm on my way right now to work. It is 36 outside here in Metro Detroit, so not bad. They are calling for a little bit of just a dusting of snow, which is not a big deal, especially with sub-zero temperatures that we experienced earlier in the week. But anywho, so I'm waiting on the fuel pump harness that I completely overlooked. Fingers crossed it should be in tomorrow or possibly next week, because I definitely want to get everything put back together, tested, and kind of move on to bigger and better things, as they say, when it comes to the C6 build. But speaking of the C6, so as I'm going to, once I'm done with the fuel pump and the fuel tank reassembly, I'm going to dive into heads and cam. Naturally aspirated setup first, and then eventually it's going to get boosted. Well, when you get into those kind of builds, I should say the smart thing to do is to get some external gauges that can output important information or important data coming from your computers. For example, if you add boosts, you want to have a boost control gauge. If you add ethanol, like I am on the naturally aspirated setup, you want a ethanol content displayed. Air to fuel, stuff like that. Now, all the three parameters that I just mentioned are pretty much non-existent, regardless of what vehicle, make, model you have through your cluster as it sits. So they do offer various different modules. Now, we'll start with, obviously, C6 specific. You can go the old school way and get yourself some gauge pods that mount on the A-pillar. I was never a fan of A-pillar gauges, just because, they do, to a certain degree, create some blind spots, restrict your line of vision. I'm actually looking to go with a single gauge setup. They can account for all of the data that I need displayed. So I was browsing through my Instagram account at the Last Corvette as well, just like the YouTube channel. And one of the guys that I follow, he has a C6 as well. And he took a picture of a gauge pod setup and a AEM gauge. Now, AEM as a company, they make all kinds of performance parts. They're known for the gauges, absolutely. And this gauge pod actually mounts right over, and like I said, it's C6 specific, mounts right over your heads-up display control, like on the outer bezel. And I think that's pretty cool. Now, on top of it, it fits in, from the pictures anyway, pretty snug, and then uses 3M tape to hold it in place. Obviously, there's no pressure on it, there's no load on it. It's not like it's just going to come right off. And it's a single pod. It's only made for the driver's side, which makes sense. You have a clear view of the gauge. It sits right there, kind of out of the way. And then running a wire is, very simple on C6s, and the same module, same gauge can work on C7s as well, because AEM OBD2 style gauges, they plug right into your OBD2 port, and they can be unplugged. They retain all their memory or whatever settings you've set. So if you need to run a scan tool, obviously tune your vehicle, you can just plug it back in, and that's the story. Everything is there. Now, the nice part about the AEM gauge, you can actually plug it into your computer via software and set up all your parameters. So obviously it's a single gauge, so it's only going to display whatever page you pick or whatever parameter you pick, right? Boost, ethanol, air to fuel, whatever else. There's like 47 or so or 50 different settings you can look, or output parameters that you can look at. And you also have analog inputs, which you can run any gauge signal wires right to it, and they'll display it as well. Very, very nice. And the cost for the gauge pod and the actual gauge itself is right around $220, $230, depending on where you buy it from. Obviously shipped and delivered right to your house. Now, I'm going to touch on something before I move on to option B for C6 and C7 specific, is you can also split your OBD2 port. So they make splitters. So you can plug it in, and then you can split it into two. So you can leave one port open for scanners or, tuning, or like in my case, if I go with the AAM setup, I can have the gauge plugged in and also my window valet that controls my windows off my fob. And then you can unplug it, and once again it'll retain all the memory and then plug it back in. Now the reason you'd want to use a splitter is because once you plug it in, it's not this bulky connector. You can actually hide it under the kick panel, zip tie it in place or whatever, and it's going to look really nice. And then if you don't want to kind of fumble with the connectors, you can just unplug the main splitter and, like I said, plug whatever else you want in it. So that is a good option to go with. Now, a company called Dash Logic, they make modules that are very, very interesting, because you don't need to add on any gauge pods, you don't need to add on any gauges, period. It actually utilizes your DIC or your instrument cluster readout. On C6s, it's right at the bottom, it's a horizontal readout. On C7s, it's basically a round information center right in the center of your dash. And what that does, it plugs in the same way into your OBD2 port. You can fully program it. Same thing, it has analog inputs. On top of it, it has more options like, 0 to 60, 0 to 30 estimated torque and horsepower, stuff like that. I'm not, that is just all kind of average anyway, but it does have the same capabilities as a OBD2 multitask gauge. And the cool thing about it, like I said, with this setup, with the Dash Logic setup, you can plug it in, once again, program your parameters, and off and running, no gauges added. You can actually just cycle right through your instrument cluster and see all of your parameters that are currently feeding in into your module. So I believe that's very, very cool, especially if you don't want to modify your car or just want to keep it stock. Now the price for that is right around $250, so it's literally a wash depending on which system you go with. One is external, one is internal, kind of a stealth setup. Now going back to AAM, the AAM can also be programmed where you can set your parameters high and low, and if you ever exceed, go above or below that particular parameter, automatically will jump to that particular parameter and display it, say, hey, there's a problem here, your air to fuel or whatever else. Very cool as well. So I'm looking at it, I'm looking at these two different options for my C6 because I do really need them. They also both display your check engine lights, right? So just regular codes as well. You can see them, you can clear them. But anyway, the moral of the story, I'm gonna kick the can down the road for probably a couple of more weeks, decide on which way I want to go. And then once I get it, I'll show you guys the setup. But if you have either the Dash Logic or the AAM setup, I know Dash Logic makes it for various makes and models, same thing with AAM. Comment below and let me know what you guys think. Talk to you guys later.